The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a canvas of amber and shadow beneath the dying light of another scorching day. Three Blackhawk helicopters thundered across the barren landscape, their rotors cutting through the thick air like mechanical vultures circling their prey. Inside the lead aircraft, Colonel Marcus Reeves studied the coordinates on his tablet, his weathered face etched with the kind of determination that came from 30 years of military service. "Target acquired 2 clicks southeast," crackled the voice of his co-pilot through the intercom. "Single aircraft, appears to be a downed F-16. No movement detected." Reeves leaned forward, adjusting his headset. The mission briefing had been clear. Locate and extract the pilot of Falcon 7, call sign unknown, who had gone dark during a routine reconnaissance flight over disputed territory. What they hadn't expected was the cryptic final transmission that had sent ripples through command. "Iron Wing, descending. Tell them the mark still flies." The words meant nothing to most of the extraction team, but Reeves had felt something cold settle in his chest when he'd heard them. Iron Wing. He'd heard that call sign whispered in the corridors of the Pentagon, spoken with the kind of reverence reserved for legends. But legends were supposed to be myths, stories told to inspire recruits and intimidate enemies. "Sir, we're approaching the crash site," the pilot's voice cut through his thoughts. "Visibility is good. I can see the aircraft now." Through the reinforced glass, Reeves could make out the distinctive silhouette of the F-16, its once proud form now crumpled against a rocky outcrop. The fighter jet's nose was buried in the sand, its tail section twisted at an unnatural angle. Fuel had leaked from the ruptured tanks, creating dark stains that spread across the desert floor like spilled ink. "Any sign of the pilot?" Reeves asked, scanning the area through binoculars. "Negative, sir. No chute visible, no emergency beacon." The colonel's jaw tightened. They'd been tracking this aircraft for 6 hours, ever since it had disappeared from radar during what should have been a routine mission. The pilot's identity remained classified, buried under layers of security clearance that even Reeves couldn't penetrate. All he knew was that someone important enough to warrant a full extraction team was down there, possibly injured, possibly dead. "Prep for landing," he ordered. "I want a full perimeter search. If there's a survivor out there, we find them." As the Black Hawks began their descent, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of a distant ridge, perfectly still, perfectly hidden. The desert kept its secrets well, and this one was about to change everything they thought they knew about the war they were fighting. The sand beneath Lieutenant Commander Alexis, Iron Wing, Vasquez's boots was still warm from the day's heat, even as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. She had been walking for 3 hours since her F-16 had kissed the desert floor in what could generously be called a controlled crash. The ejection seat had worked perfectly, but the landing had been less than textbook. Her left shoulder screamed with each step, and she could taste copper in her mouth from where she'd bitten her tongue during the impact. But Vasquez was alive, and that was more than her enemies had planned. She crouched behind a cluster of weathered rocks, watching the 3 Black Hawks circle her down aircraft like hawks studying a carcass. Through her scope, she could see the tactical markings on the helicopter's sides, the familiar insignia that should have brought relief. Instead, her blood ran cold. These weren't rescue birds, they were hunters. The radio clipped to her survival vest crackled to life. "Iron Wing, this is Reaper Command. Do you copy?" Vasquez's finger hovered over the transmit button. Reaper Command wasn't in her emergency contact list. Hell, Reaper Command wasn't supposed to exist. She'd spent enough years in the shadow world to know when something smelled wrong, and this entire situation reeked of deception. "Iron Wing, respond immediately. We have assets in your area." "Assets, not rescue teams, not friendly forces. Assets." She clicked the radio once, then twice. The old signal. If anyone monitoring the frequency understood the code, they'd know she was alive but compromised. If they didn't understand, she'd bought herself time to figure out who was hunting her and why. The lead Black Hawk touched down near her crashed fighter, kicking up a cloud of sand that obscured the landing zone. Through her scope, Vasquez watched as figures in tactical gear emerged from the aircraft. Their movements were too precise, too coordinated for a standard rescue operation. These were operators, the kind of soldiers who appeared in classified briefings and disappeared into legend. One of them, a tall man with Colonel's eagles on his collar, approached her F-16 with the careful gait of someone who'd seen too much combat. He gestured to his team, and they spread out in a search pattern that would have impressed her if she weren't the one they were hunting. Vasquez shifted her weight, feeling the familiar weight of the sidearm holstered at her hip. 43 confirmed kills in the air, but she'd never had to fight on the ground. The irony wasn't lost on her. Iron Wing, the ghost of the sky, reduced to hiding behind rocks like a scared rabbit. But rabbits, she knew, could be dangerous when cornered. The colonel stopped beside her aircraft and pulled out a tablet, studying whatever information it displayed. Even from this distance, Vasquez could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his head turned slightly as he processed what he was seeing. Or rather, what he wasn't seeing. No body, no blood, no indication of where the pilot had gone. She allowed herself a grim smile. Let them search. Let them wonder. The desert had taught her patience, and she'd learned its lessons well. Colonel Reeves ran his hand along the F-16's canopy, noting the pristine condition of the ejection seat mechanisms. The pilot had gotten out clean, which meant they were dealing with a trained professional, not some rookie who'd panicked and died on impact. The absence of blood was both reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because it meant their target was likely alive. Concerning because it meant their target was mobile, armed, and potentially hostile. Spread out, he ordered his team. Standard search pattern. Our pilot is out there somewhere. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, his team's tracker, knelt beside the aircraft and studied the sand. Sir, I've got footprints leading northeast. Single person, military boots, favoring the left leg slightly. Reeves nodded. Injured but mobile, how long? Based on the wind patterns and sand displacement, I'd say 3 to 4 hours. Santos stood, brushing dust from her knees. They're not moving fast, but they're covering ground. The colonel activated his radio. Reaper command, this is Blackhawk leader. Target is mobile and moving northeast of the crash site, requesting permission to pursue. The response came immediately, crisp and authoritative. Blackhawk leader, you are cleared for pursuit. Target is to be brought in alive. Repeat, alive. Use of lethal force is authorized only if absolutely necessary. Reeves felt his team's eyes on him. In 30 years of service, he'd never received an order quite like that. The emphasis on bringing the target in alive, combined with the mysterious nature of their mission, suggested they weren't dealing with an ordinary pilot. Someone at the highest levels wanted this person very badly. You heard the orders, he said. Let's move. As the team prepared to follow the trail, Specialist James Crawford, their communications expert, approached with a troubled expression. Sir, I'm picking up some unusual chatter on the emergency frequencies. Someone's been transmitting in code. What kind of code? Old school stuff. Double-click patterns, timing intervals. It's not in any of our current manuals. Reeves felt that cold sensation in his chest again. Play it back. The radio crackled with static, then 2 sharp clicks, followed by a pause, then 2 more clicks. The pattern was simple, almost primitive, but something about it triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. Sir, Crawford waited for instructions. Keep monitoring, Reeves said finally. And Crawford, whatever you hear, it doesn't leave this team. The specialist nodded, understanding the gravity in his commander's tone. In the military, there were orders, and then there were orders. This was definitely the latter. As the team moved out, following the trail northeast into the deepening desert, None of them noticed the figure watching from a rocky outcrop 200 meters to their west. Vasquez had circled back, using terrain masking to stay hidden while observing their every move. She'd learned long ago that the best way to stay ahead of hunters was to know exactly where they were at all times. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of a cold night ahead. Vasquez checked her watch. 4 hours until full darkness. 4 hours to figure out why her own military was hunting her like an enemy combatant. Vasquez moved like a ghost through the desert landscape, her combat boots making no sound on the packed sand. The survival training from her early days as a pilot had never left her, and now those skills were the only thing keeping her alive. Every shadow was a potential hiding place, every rock formation a possible ambush site. She'd been running for 6 hours now, and the pursuit team was closing the distance. Through her scope, she could see them clearly now. 5 operators, moving in a diamond formation with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Their leader, the colonel with the weathered face, carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never failed a mission. It was almost admirable if they weren't trying to capture her. The radio on her vest crackled again. "Iron Wing, this is Reaper Command. We know you're monitoring this frequency. Surrender now and we can resolve this peacefully." Peacefully? The word tasted bitter in her mouth. In her experience, people who talked about peace while surrounding you with armed soldiers usually had something else entirely in mind. She keyed the radio once, then held it for 3 seconds before releasing. The old distress signal. If anyone from her real unit was listening, they'd know she was in trouble. If not, she'd just bought herself a few more hours of cat and mouse. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful if you had time to appreciate it. Vasquez didn't. She could hear the helicopters repositioning, their rotors cutting through the evening air as they established a perimeter. They were boxing her in, slowly tightening the noose. But Iron Wing hadn't survived 15 years of combat by being predictable. She'd earned her call sign during the Syrian campaign, when her F-16 had taken a missile hit that should have killed her. Instead, she'd flown the crippled aircraft back to base on one engine and sheer determination, the left wing shredded but still maintaining lift. The ground crews had called it a miracle. Her squadron leader had called it the mark of iron. Now, crouched behind a boulder with the desert growing cold around her, Vasquez understood that iron was about more than just surviving aircraft damage. It was about enduring whatever the world threw at you and coming back stronger. The pursuit team might have her outnumbered and outgunned, but they didn't have her experience, her desperation, or her growing certainty that something was very wrong with this entire situation. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Reaper Command. The voice was different, older, with the kind of authority that came from years of making life-and-death decisions. "Iron Wing, this is Ghost Actual. If you're listening, you need to know that Reaper Command is not authorized for this operation. Repeat, they are not authorized. Whatever you do, do not surrender to those forces." Vasquez felt her heart rate spike. Ghost Actual was a code name she hadn't heard in 3 years, not since the classified operation that had made her a legend in certain circles. If Ghost Actual was breaking radio silence, the situation was worse than she'd imagined. Colonel Reeves heard the transmission too, and his face went pale. Ghost Actual was a name from the classified files, the kind of operation that officially never happened. If they were involved, this mission had just become infinitely more complicated. "Sir," Santos looked at him questioningly. "Orders." Reeves stared at the radio in his hand, decades of military training warring with a growing sense that they were all pieces in a game whose rules he didn't understand. The desert stretched endlessly around them, holding its secrets close, while somewhere in the darkness, Iron Wing waited and watched. The night was falling, and with it, the real hunt was about to begin. Santos had been tracking targets for 12 years, but she'd never encountered anything like this. The footprints they'd been following for hours told a story of someone who understood the desert, who moved with purpose and intelligence. Not the panicked flight of a downed pilot, but the calculated retreat of a professional. "Colonel," she whispered, crouching beside a cluster of rocks, "the trail splits here, 3 different directions." Reeves studied the disturbed sand, his jaw tightening. "Decoy patterns. Has to be. No way someone with a leg injury moves like this naturally." Santos pointed to each trail. "Northeast continues toward the mountains. Southwest heads back toward the crash site. Due east goes deeper into the desert." The colonel activated his radio, keeping his voice low. "Reaper Command, we need additional assets. Target is employing evasion tactics beyond standard pilot training." The response came immediately. "Negative, Blackhawk leader. No additional assets available. Complete your mission with current resources." Reeves felt his unease growing. In 30 years of service, he'd never been denied backup when facing an unknown threat. Resources were always available for high-priority operations, especially ones that required this level of security clearance. "Copy that, command." He released the radio and turned to his team. "We split up. Santos, take Crawford and follow the northeast trail. I'll take the other 2 and check the southwest route." "Sir," Santos hesitated, "what about the eastern trail?" "We'll double back if the others are decoys." As the team prepared to split up, Specialist Crawford raised his hand. "Sir, I'm picking up more coded transmissions. Same pattern as before, but the timing intervals are different." Reeves took the radio. The clicks came in groups now, 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. "SOS, the international distress signal." "She's calling for help," he murmured. "Sir," Santos looked confused. "Why would she call for help if she's running from us?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Reeves had been wondering the same thing. Their orders were clear: locate and extract the pilot of Falcon 7. But pilots didn't run from rescue teams. They didn't use evasion tactics against their own forces. They didn't transmit distress signals while actively avoiding capture. Unless they had a reason to. "Change of plans," Reeves said suddenly. "We stick together, no splitting up." "Sorry. Something's not right here. We're going to follow the northeast trail, but we're going to do it carefully. Full tactical awareness. Treat this as a potential hostile environment." Santos nodded, understanding the shift in her commander's tone. They were no longer on a rescue mission. They were on a hunt, and they weren't entirely sure who the prey was supposed to be. As the team moved out, following the trail toward the distant mountains, Vasquez watched from her position on the eastern ridge. She'd created the false trails during the daylight hours, using techniques learned from a Bedouin tracker during her deployment in Jordan. The desert was a harsh teacher, but it rewarded those who understood its lessons. The radio on her vest crackled again. "Iron Wing, this is Ghost Actual. Are you receiving?" She keyed the radio once. "Affirmative." "Good, listen carefully. Reaper Command is not what they appear to be. The operation you're running from is unsanctioned. Do not, under any circumstances, allow them to capture you." Vasquez felt her blood run cold. Unsanctioned meant rogue. It meant someone had decided that Iron Wing was a problem that needed to be solved quietly, without official approval. The kind of operation that would be denied by everyone involved if it ever came to light. But who would want her dead, and why? The answer came to her suddenly, like a punch to the gut. Damascus, the operation that had made her a legend. The one that officially never happened. The one that had saved hundreds of lives but had also exposed something that certain people wanted to keep buried. Someone was tying up loose ends, and Iron Wing was at the top of the list. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of a long, cold night. Vasquez checked her weapons, inventoried her ammunition, and settled in for what was going to be the fight of her life. Iron Wing had survived 15 years of combat by being smarter than her enemies. Tonight, she was going to prove that the mark of iron was more than just a call sign. It was a promise. And promises in the desert were written in blood. Crawford's hands shook as he monitored the radio frequencies. 23 years old, fresh out of advanced communications training, and he was beginning to understand that some knowledge came with a price. The coded transmissions he'd been intercepting weren't random chatter. They were pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture he didn't want to see. "Sir," he whispered to Colonel Reeves, "I think you need to hear this." The colonel took the headset, his weathered face growing more troubled with each transmission. Ghost Actual wasn't just any call sign. It was the designation for the most classified operations, the ones that existed in the shadows between official military doctrine and necessary action. If Ghost Actual was involved, they were all walking into something much bigger than a simple pilot extraction. "Crawford," Reeves said quietly, "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without asking questions." "Sir?" "I need you to open a secure channel to Pentagon communications. Authorization code Yankee 77 Delta. Can you do that?" Crawford's eyes widened. Yankee 77 Delta was a code he'd learned about in advanced training, but had never expected to use. It was the designation for operations that required immediate Pentagon oversight, the kind of authorization that bypassed normal command structures. "Sir, that's a direct line to the Joint Chiefs." "I know what it is, son. Can you do it?" Crawford nodded, his fingers flying over the communication array. The desert around them was silent except for the whisper of wind through the rocks and the distant sound of helicopter rotors. But beneath that silence, he could sense something else. Tension. The kind of electric anticipation that came before a storm. The secure channel crackled to life. "Pentagon Communications, this is Night Watch. State your authorization and purpose." Reeves took the handset. "Night Watch, this is Colonel Marcus Reeves. Authorization Yankee 77 Delta. I need immediate confirmation on Operation Reaper, current status and authorization level." There was a long pause. Then, "Colonel Reeves, stand by for authentication." While they waited, Santos moved closer to the group. "Sir, I'm seeing movement on the eastern ridge. Could be our target." Reeves raised his binoculars, scanning the rocky outcrop. Nothing. But Santos had the best eyes in the unit, and she didn't make mistakes. "How sure are you?" 90%. Something's up there and it's watching us." The radio crackled again. "Colonel Reeves, this is General Patricia Morrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff. What's your situation?" Reeves felt his mouth go dry. General Morrison was the Pentagon's chief of operations, the person who authorized the most sensitive missions in the military. If she was personally responding to his call, the situation was more serious than he'd imagined. "General, we're currently pursuing a downed pilot, call sign Iron Wing. We've been told this is a standard extraction, but we're encountering some irregularities." "Colonel, I need you to listen very carefully. Operation Reaper is not, repeat not, an authorized mission. You and your team are to disengage immediately and return to base." The words hit Reeves like a physical blow. Unauthorized. Which meant someone had sent them into the desert on a mission that didn't officially exist, chasing a pilot who wasn't supposed to be found. "General, we received direct orders from Reaper Command. They have proper authorization codes." "Colonel, Reaper Command was disbanded 3 years ago. Whatever authorization codes they're using, they're not legitimate." The silence that followed was deafening. Reeves looked at his team, seeing his own shock reflected in their faces. They'd been played, used as unwitting participants in something that went far beyond their understanding. "Sir," Santos waited for orders. But before Reeves could respond, the radio crackled with a new voice. Cold, authoritative, and completely unfamiliar. "Colonel Reeves, this is Control. You will disregard any communications from Pentagon sources and continue your mission. Iron Wing is to be brought in at all costs. General Morrison's voice cut through immediately. Colonel, do not acknowledge that transmission. You are to disengage and return to base immediately. Reeves stared at the radio, his mind racing. Two different commands, two different authorities, both claiming legitimacy. In the military, confusion could be fatal, but in this case, confusion might be the only thing keeping them alive. On the eastern ridge, Vasquez watched the drama unfold through her scope. She could see the confusion in the colonel's body language, the way his team clustered around him like soldiers who'd suddenly realized they were in enemy territory. The pieces were falling into place, and she didn't like the picture they were creating. Someone wanted Iron Wing dead. Someone with enough power to manipulate military units and enough desperation to risk exposure. The Damascus operation had been 3 years ago, but apparently some secrets had a long shelf life. The radio on her vest crackled. Iron Wing, this is Ghost Actual. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. You need to get out of there now. Vasquez keyed the radio once. Message received. But getting out was easier said than done. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, and she was one person against forces she couldn't fully understand. But Iron Wing hadn't survived 15 years of combat by accepting defeat. She'd survived by being smarter, tougher, and more determined than anyone who stood in her way. The Mark of Iron wasn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It was about enduring whatever the world threw at you and coming back stronger. Tonight, she was going to prove that some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant fighting alone. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of a long, cold night. Vasquez checked her weapons, inventoried her ammunition, and prepared for what was going to be the fight of her life. Iron Wing was about to show them all what the Mark of Iron really meant. General Morrison's voice cut through the desert air with the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years making life-and-death decisions. Colonel Reeves, I'm issuing a direct order. You are to cease all operations immediately and extract your team. Iron Wing is under Pentagon protection. But even as she spoke, Reeves could hear other voices on the channel, coded transmissions that shouldn't exist, overlapping communications from sources that officially didn't exist. The radio spectrum was becoming a battlefield, and he was caught in the crossfire. Sir, Crawford's voice was tight with tension. I'm picking up helicopter signatures on approach. 3 birds coming in fast from the northwest. Reeves felt his blood run cold. They'd come out here with 3 Blackhawks. If more helicopters were approaching, they weren't friendly. Santos' defensive positions, now. His team scattered among the rocks, muscle memory and training taking over. But as they moved, Reeves caught sight of something that made his heart skip. On the eastern ridge, silhouetted against the darkening sky, was a figure. Small, compact, moving with the fluid grace of someone who understood the desert. Iron Wing. She was closer than he'd thought, close enough that he could see the distinctive outline of her flight suit, the way she moved her head as she scanned the approaching helicopters. And there was something else, something that made him lower his binoculars and stare. On her shoulder, clearly visible even at this distance, was a patch. Not the standard squadron insignia, but something else. Something that made his throat go dry with recognition. The Mark of Iron. It was a legend, a story told in hushed tones in the most classified briefings. A group of pilots who'd undertaken missions that officially never happened, operations that existed in the shadows between military doctrine and necessary action. The Damascus operation, the Tehran extraction, the Kandahar incident that had saved an entire battalion but had never appeared in any official records. And Iron Wing had been there for all of them. Colonel, Santos's voice snapped him back to reality. Those helicopters are not showing friendly IFF signals. Reeves activated his radio. Reaper Command, this is Blackhawk Leader. We have unknown aircraft approaching our position. The response came immediately. Blackhawk leader, those are additional assets. Do not engage. But something in the voice was wrong. Too smooth, too controlled. Reeves had heard that tone before in the voices of people who were lying. General Morrison, he said into the Pentagon channel, we have a situation developing. Colonel, I'm tracking the same aircraft. They are not, repeat not, authorized Pentagon assets. You are to consider them hostile. The contradiction hit him like a physical blow. His mission command was telling him the approaching helicopters were friendlies. The Pentagon was telling him they were hostile. And somewhere in the middle, Iron Wing was watching and waiting, a legend made flesh in the middle of a desert that was about to become a battlefield. Crawford, he said quietly, I need you to do something for me. Sir, I need you to open a channel to Iron Wing, direct frequency. Can you do that? Crawford's hands flew over the radio array. Sir, I'm not sure I should. Son, right now I'm not sure about anything, but I'm sure about this. Someone is lying to us, and if we're going to survive the night, we need to know who. The radio crackled with static, then cleared. Iron Wing, this is Blackhawk leader. Do you copy? For a long moment there was nothing, then a voice, clear and steady despite the circumstances. Blackhawk leader, this is Iron Wing. I copy. It was a woman's voice, calm and professional despite the chaos surrounding them. But underneath the professionalism, Reeves could hear something else. Exhaustion, pain, and a kind of determination that he'd only heard in the voices of people who'd seen too much combat and lived to tell about it. Iron Wing, we need to talk. Colonel, I don't think that's a good idea for either of us. Ma'am, I'm beginning to think someone's been lying to all of us. Those helicopters approaching from the northwest, they're not showing friendly signals. There was a pause. Then, Colonel, those helicopters are here to kill me, and if you're standing too close when they arrive, they'll kill you too. The words hung in the air like smoke. Reeves looked at his team, seeing his own growing realization reflected in their faces. They weren't on a rescue mission. They were pawns in a game whose rules they didn't understand, and Iron Wing was the prize. Ma'am, he said carefully, what happened in Damascus? The silence that followed was deafening. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. Damascus was the day I learned that some truths are too dangerous to live. On the eastern ridge, Vasquez felt the weight of 3 years pressing down on her shoulders. Damascus, the operation that had made her a legend and marked her for death. She'd saved 200 civilians from a terrorist attack, but in doing so, she'd uncovered something that certain people wanted to keep buried. The approaching helicopters were getting closer, their rotor signatures clear against the evening sky. Not rescue birds. Hunter-killers designed for one purpose, to eliminate threats to national security. Tonight, Iron Wing was the threat. But as she watched the colonel's team take defensive positions, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't going to die alone in the desert. The mark of iron was about to be tested in ways she'd never imagined. The 3 helicopters approached like mechanical vultures, their black silhouettes stark against the purple-orange sunset. Vasquez could see them clearly now through her scope, not the standard Black Hawks that had been chasing her, but something else entirely. Apache gunships, bristling with weapons systems designed for one purpose: search and destroy. Colonel, her voice crackled through the radio, you need to get your people out of there, now. Reeves was studying the approaching aircraft through his binoculars, his experienced eyes noting details that Crawford and Santos couldn't see. The helicopters weren't flying in standard formation. They were spread out, positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. This wasn't a rescue operation or even a capture mission. This was an execution. Iron Wing, he said quietly, what did you find in Damascus? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vasquez closed her eyes, remembering the day that had changed everything. The intelligence briefing that had gone too far. The classified documents that had revealed a network of operations that officially didn't exist. The realization that some people in the military were playing a game with rules that had nothing to do with honor or duty. I found out that some wars are fought in the shadows, she said finally, and some soldiers are considered expendable when they know too much. Ma'am, I need you to be more specific. Colonel, there's a group within the military that's been running unauthorized operations for years. Black budget stuff. Operations that Congress doesn't know about, that the president doesn't authorize. Damascus was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission, but I stumbled onto something bigger. Reeves felt his world shifting. In 30 years of service, he'd heard rumors of such operations, whispered stories that were dismissed as conspiracy theories. But the evidence was flying toward them at 150 knots, armed with Hellfire missiles and the authorization to use them. What kind of operations? Assassinations, regime changes, arms dealing, the kind of stuff that would destroy the military if it ever came to light. Vasquez's voice was steady, but he could hear the pain underneath. I tried to report it through proper channels. That's when I learned that some of the people in those proper channels were part of the problem. The lead Apache was close enough now that Reeves could see the pilot's helmet through the cockpit glass. Professional, focused, the kind of person who followed orders without questioning them. Sir, Santos's voice was tight with tension. They're painting us with targeting lasers. Reeves felt his stomach drop. Targeting lasers meant the helicopters were preparing to fire. They had maybe seconds before the desert became a killing field. All units defensive positions. Return fire authorized. But even as he gave the order, Reeves knew it was hopeless. 5 soldiers with small arms against 3 Apache gunships wasn't a fight. It was suicide. Iron Wing, he said into the radio. If you have any tricks up your sleeve, now would be a good time. Colonel, there's something you need to understand about the mark of iron. It's not just about surviving aircraft damage. It's about doing what's right, even when the cost is everything you hold dear. Ma'am, I've been carrying something for 3 years. Information that could bring down the entire shadow network. But using it means destroying the careers of good people who got caught up in something they didn't understand. The first Apache opened fire, its chain gun sending a stream of 30 rounds into the rocks where Crawford had been positioned. The young communications specialist dove for cover, his radio equipment exploding in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. That's it, Reeves snarled. Santos, light them up. His team opened fire with everything they had. M4 rifles, squad automatic weapons, even a shoulder-fired rocket that Santos had been carrying for emergencies. The rockets streaked across the desert, trailing smoke and fire, but the Apache were already moving, their pilots skilled enough to avoid the incoming rounds. Colonel, Iron Wing's voice cut through the chaos. I'm going to do something that's going to change everything, but I need you to trust me. Ma'am, at this point, I'm not sure we have a choice. The information I'm carrying, it's not just about Damascus. It's about a network of operations that goes back 10 years. Names, dates, financial records, everything needed to bring down the shadow network. Another Apache opened fire, this one targeting the rocks where Reeves had taken cover. The 30 rounds shattered stone and sent debris flying like shrapnel. He pressed himself against the ground, feeling the heat of the explosions wash over him. Iron Wing, whatever you're going to do, do it fast. Colonel, I'm sending you a data packet, everything I've been carrying for 3 years. If something happens to me, I need you to get it to General Morrison at the Pentagon. Ma'am, nothing's going to happen to you. Colonel, I'm going to draw them off. When I do, you and your team need to get out of here. Before Reeves could respond, he saw movement on the eastern ridge. Iron Wing was moving, running across the rocky terrain with the fluid grace of someone who understood the desert, and she was heading straight toward the Apache gunships. Iron Wing, what are you doing? What I should have done 3 years ago, fighting back. The data packet arrived on Crawford's backup radio just as the young specialist was reloading his weapon. Gigabytes of classified information, enough to bring down a shadow network that had operated in the darkness for a decade. Names, dates, financial records, operation plans, everything needed to expose the truth. "Sir," Crawford shouted over the sound of gunfire, "I've got it, the data packet, it's everything." Reeves felt something cold settle in his chest. Iron Wing wasn't just running from the shadow network. She was fighting it, and she was willing to die to make sure the truth survived. On the eastern ridge, Vasquez checked her sidearm one last time. 43 confirmed kills in the air, but tonight she was fighting on the ground. The irony wasn't lost on her. Iron Wing, the ghost of the sky, about to make her final stand among the rocks and sand. But as she prepared to move, something caught her eye. Movement in the distance, beyond the Apache gunships. More helicopters, but these were different. These were flying in formation, with the disciplined precision of authorized military assets. "Colonel," she said into the radio, "I think the cavalry just arrived." Reeves followed her gaze and felt his heart skip. 6 helicopters approaching from the southeast, flying in perfect formation. And on their sides, clearly visible even at this distance, were the markings of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers. "Iron Wing," he said quietly, "I think someone at the Pentagon has been listening." The lead Apache pilot saw them too. Through his targeting system, he could see the approaching helicopters, could identify their markings, could understand that the simple execution mission had just become infinitely more complicated. The Night Stalkers were the military's elite helicopter unit, the ones called in when missions absolutely could not fail. "Control, this is Reaper 1. We have incoming military assets. Orders." The voice that answered was cold, professional, and completely devoid of emotion. "Reaper 1, complete your mission. All assets in the area are to be considered hostile." The pilot felt his blood run cold. He'd been flying combat missions for 8 years, had participated in operations that officially didn't exist, but he'd never been ordered to fire on United States military assets. That was a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. "Control, confirm last order. Are we authorized to engage U.S. military assets?" "Reaper 1, you are authorized to engage all threats to mission completion. Repeat, all threats." The pilot looked at his gunner, seeing his own shock reflected in the man's eyes. They'd signed up to fight America's enemies, not America's soldiers. But orders were orders, and the shadow network didn't tolerate hesitation. "Reaper 1, engaging all targets." The first Apache opened fire on the approaching Night Stalkers, its Hellfire missiles streaking across the desert like falling stars. But the Night Stalkers were ready for them. The elite pilots scattered their formation, diving and climbing with the precision of aerial dancers, their aircraft moving in patterns that seemed to defy physics. "This is Ghost Rider Lead," a new voice crackled across the radio frequencies. "All units, we have unauthorized aircraft engaging U.S. military assets. You are cleared to engage." The battle that followed was unlike anything Reeves had ever seen. Apache gunships against Night Stalker Blackhawks, the Shadow Network's hunters against the military's most elite aviators. Missiles streaked across the darkening sky, tracer rounds lit up the desert like deadly fireworks, and the sound of rotor blades filled the air with mechanical thunder. But the Night Stalkers had one advantage that the Shadow Network's pilots lacked. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for the truth, for the soldiers on the ground, for the idea that some things were worth dying for. "Colonel," Iron Wing's voice cut through the chaos, "I'm moving to your position. We need to get that data packet to safety. Negative, Iron Wing, too dangerous. Colonel, with respect, I've been running from these people for 3 years. I'm tired of running. Reeves watched as she moved across the rocky terrain, her flight suit a splash of color against the darkening desert. She moved like someone who understood combat, who had faced death so many times that it had become an old friend. The Mark of Iron wasn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It was about enduring whatever the world threw at you and coming back stronger. Santos, he called to his tracker, cover fire, Iron Wing is moving to our position. His team opened fire on the remaining Apache, their small arms fire ineffective against the helicopter's armor, but enough to distract the pilots. The gunship turned toward them, its chain gun spinning up for another attack run. That's when Ghost Rider lead struck. The Night Stalker pilot had been waiting for his moment, flying low and fast through the desert terrain, using the rocky outcrops to mask his approach. His Blackhawk wasn't designed for air-to-air combat, but the Night Stalkers had a reputation for making the impossible look routine. The rocket-propelled grenade streaked from the side door of the Blackhawk, striking the Apache in the engine compartment. The explosion lit up the desert like a miniature sun, and the Shadow Network's hunter-killer tumbled from the sky in a ball of fire and twisted metal. Reaper 2, Reaper 1 is down, the remaining Apache pilot reported, requesting immediate extraction. Negative, Reaper 2, complete the mission. But the pilot had seen enough. His wingman was dead, the Night Stalkers controlled the airspace, and the mission parameters had changed beyond recognition. Some orders weren't worth following, especially when they meant firing on fellow Americans. Control, this is Reaper 2. I'm declaring an emergency and returning to base. Reaper 2, you are ordered to complete the mission. The pilot switched off his radio and turned his aircraft toward the southeast, toward the base where he could report what had really happened in the desert. The Shadow Network's power was vast, but it wasn't absolute. There were still people in the military who believed in honor, duty, and the idea that some truths were worth preserving. Iron Wing reached the colonel's position just as the last Apache disappeared into the darkening sky. She was breathing hard, her left shoulder clearly paining her, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. "Colonel," she said, extending her hand. "Lieutenant Commander Alexis Vasquez, call sign Iron Wing. I believe we have some talking to do." Reeves took her hand, feeling the calluses that came from years of gripping flight controls, the strength that came from surviving impossible situations. "Colonel Marcus Reeves, ma'am, I think you may have just saved all our lives." "No, Colonel. I think we may have just saved something more important than that." She looked up at the Night Stalker helicopters circling overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. "I think we may have just saved the truth." Ghost Rider lead settled onto the desert floor with the precision of a master craftsman, his rotor wash kicking up clouds of sand and debris. The pilot who emerged from the cockpit was a woman in her 40s, her flight suit bearing the wings of a senior aviator and the insignia of someone who had seen combat in every major conflict of the past 2 decades. "Colonel Reeves," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded operations in the most dangerous places on Earth. "I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, 160th SOAR. General Morrison sends her regards." Reeves saluted, still trying to process the events of the past hour. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what just happened here." "What happened, Colonel, is that you and your team stumbled into something much bigger than anyone intended. The Shadow Network has been operating for years, but tonight they overplayed their hand." Martinez turned to Iron Wing. "Commander Vasquez, the Pentagon has been looking for you for 3 years." Iron Wing straightened, her military bearing evident despite her exhaustion. "Ma'am, I tried to report what I found through proper channels. When that failed, I went underground." "You did exactly what you should have done. The information you've been carrying is the key to bringing down a network that's been operating outside military authority for almost a decade. Martinez gestured to the Night Stalkers, setting up a perimeter around the landing zone. General Morrison has been building a case, but she needed proof. You've provided that proof. Crawford, still clutching the backup radio containing the data packet, approached cautiously. "Ma'am, the information Commander Vasquez sent us, it's extensive." "I know, son. Names, dates, financial records, operation plans, everything needed to expose the truth." Martinez looked at the young communications specialist with something that might have been pride. "You've done good work tonight." "Ma'am, I just did what Colonel Reeves ordered." Sometimes that's all it takes, following the right orders from the right people. Santos was monitoring the radio frequencies, her expression troubled. "Ma'am, I'm picking up chatter about asset denial protocols, whatever that means." Martinez's face went hard. "It means they're going to try to eliminate all evidence of tonight's operation, including us." The words hit the assembled soldiers like a physical blow. Asset denial was a euphemism for something much darker: the elimination of witnesses, the destruction of evidence, the kind of cleanup operation that left no survivors and no traces. "Ma'am," Reeves said quietly, "how do we stop them?" "By getting that data packet to the Pentagon before they can stop us. General Morrison has a congressional hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. If she can present this information to Congress, the shadow network won't be able to cover it up." Iron Wing checked her watch. "Ma'am, how long do we have?" 6 hours until the hearing, 4 hours to get back to base and prep the data for presentation." Martinez looked at the desert around them, calculating distances and time. "It's going to be close." "Ma'am," Crawford said hesitantly, "what about the rest of the shadow network? If they're willing to eliminate us, what's to stop them from eliminating the congressional committee?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Martinez had been wondering the same thing. The shadow network had vast resources, connections throughout the military and intelligence communities, and a demonstrated willingness to eliminate threats. Taking them down would require more than just evidence. It would require courage, determination, and a willingness to fight for something bigger than themselves. "Son," she said finally, "that's what we're here for. The 160th doesn't just transport soldiers, we transport hope, and sometimes hope is the most dangerous weapon of all." As the Night Stalkers prepared for departure, Iron Wing looked back at the desert where she'd spent the last 24 hours running for her life. The sand was already beginning to cover the evidence of the battle, the wind erasing the footprints and tire tracks that told the story of what had happened here. But some stories, she knew, were too important to be erased by wind and sand. Some truths were worth fighting for, even if the cost was everything you held dear. The Mark of Iron wasn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It was about enduring whatever the world threw at you and coming back stronger. Tonight, Iron Wing had proven that some things were worth more than survival. Some things were worth dying for, and tonight they were worth living for too. The flight back to base was a study in controlled tension. 3 Night Stalker helicopters flying in tight formation through the darkness, their crews maintaining constant radio contact with Pentagon communications. Iron Wing sat in the lead aircraft, her data packet secured in Crawford's military-grade encryption device, watching the desert pass beneath them like a dark ocean. "Ghost Rider lead, this is Pentagon control. Be advised, we're tracking multiple aircraft converging on your position." Colonel Martinez's voice was steady despite the circumstances. "Pentagon control, can you identify the aircraft?" "Negative, Ghost Rider lead. They're not squawking standard IFF codes. Recommend you assume hostile intent." Iron Wing felt her stomach tighten. The shadow network wasn't giving up. They were throwing everything they had at stopping the truth from reaching Congress. Asset denial protocols meant they were willing to sacrifice anything, including their own people, to maintain their secrets. "Colonel," she said quietly, "they're not going to let us reach base." Martinez nodded grimly. "I know, but the 160th has a reputation for getting through impossible situations. Tonight's not going to be any different." Through the cockpit glass, Iron Wing could see the lights of approaching aircraft. Not the running lights of friendly forces, but the searchlights of hunters. The Shadow Network had mobilized everything they had, and they were closing in fast. "All units, this is Ghost Rider lead. We have multiple bogies on approach. Evasive maneuvers, maintain formation." The Night Stalkers scattered like startled birds, their pilots using every trick they'd learned in 2 decades of combat operations. They flew low and fast, using the desert terrain to mask their approach, their aircraft dancing through the darkness with the precision of aerial ballet. But the Shadow Network's pilots were skilled too. They knew the desert, knew the flight patterns, knew how to hunt targets in the darkness. And they had one advantage that the Night Stalkers lacked. They were fighting for their lives, not just their mission. "Ghost Rider 2, I'm taking fire," crackled the voice of the second helicopter's pilot. "Multiple contacts coming in from the northeast." Iron Wing could see the tracer rounds streaking through the darkness, deadly lines of light that turned the night into a battlefield. The Shadow Network was using everything they had: Apache gunships, armed drones, even fighter jets that officially didn't exist. "Crawford," she said urgently, "is there any way to transmit that data packet directly to the Pentagon?" The young communications specialist was working frantically with his equipment, trying to establish a secure connection while the helicopter bucked and weaved through the hostile fire. "Ma'am, I'm trying, but the encryption protocols require a hardwired connection. I can't send it over the radio." "What about satellite uplink?" "The file is too large. It would take 20 minutes to transmit, and we don't have that kind of time." Iron Wing felt desperation creeping in. They were so close to exposing the truth, so close to bringing down the Shadow Network, but the data packet was trapped in a helicopter that was being hunted by forces that would stop at nothing to destroy it. "Ma'am," Crawford said suddenly, "there is one option, but it's risky." "What is it?" "I can fragment the data packet and send it to multiple destinations simultaneously. Pentagon communications, congressional servers, even some media outlets. If the Shadow Network manages to stop one transmission, the others might get through." Iron Wing felt her heart racing. Fragmenting the data meant that even if some of it was intercepted, enough would survive to expose the truth. But it also meant that the information would be scattered across multiple networks, vulnerable to interception and manipulation. "Do it," she said. "Ma'am, if I do this, there's no going back. The information will be out there, and we won't be able to control who sees it." "Son, sometimes the truth is more important than control." Crawford nodded and began the fragmentation process. His fingers flew over the keyboard, splitting the massive data file into dozens of smaller packets, each one containing a piece of the puzzle that was the Shadow Network. Names, dates, financial records, operation plans, everything needed to expose the truth. "Ghost Rider lead, this is Ghost Rider 3, I'm hit. Repeat, I'm hit, engine fire, losing altitude." Through the cockpit glass, Iron Wing could see the third helicopter trailing smoke and fire, its pilot fighting to maintain control as the aircraft descended toward the desert floor. The Shadow Network's hunters were closing in, their weapons finding their marks with deadly precision. "Ghost Rider 3, this is Ghost Rider lead. Can you make it to base?" "Negative lead. I'm going down, but I've got 6 good people on board and we're not giving up without a fight." Iron Wing watched as the damaged helicopter settled onto the desert floor, its crew immediately taking defensive positions around the aircraft. They were surrounded, outnumbered and outgunned, but they were still fighting. The Mark of Iron wasn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It was about enduring whatever the world threw at you and coming back stronger. "Crawford," she said urgently, "how long until the transmission is complete?" "2 minutes, ma'am, maybe less." "Ma'am," Colonel Martinez's voice cut through the chaos, "we're not going to make it to base. The Shadow Network has established a perimeter around the airfield. They're going to shoot us down before we can land." Iron Wing felt the weight of 3 years pressing down on her shoulders. She'd been running from the Shadow Network, hiding in the darkness, carrying the truth like a burden that was slowly killing her. But now, with the data packet fragmenting and transmitting to multiple destinations, she realized that the burden was about to be lifted. "Colonel," she said quietly, "there's something you need to know about the Mark of Iron." "Ma'am." "It's not just about surviving aircraft damage. It's about understanding that sometimes the mission is more important than the people who carry it out." Martinez looked at her with growing understanding. "Ma'am, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that the data packet is more important than any of us. If we can get it to the Pentagon, to Congress, to the media, then the Shadow Network loses, even if we don't survive to see it." The helicopter shuddered as another burst of gunfire raked across its hull. Through the cockpit glass, Iron Wing could see the Shadow Network's hunters closing in, their searchlights cutting through the darkness like the eyes of mechanical predators. "Crawford," she said urgently, "status on the transmission." 90% complete, ma'am, 30 seconds. "Ma'am," Martinez said quietly, "it's been an honor serving with you." Iron Wing felt tears she hadn't shed in 3 years threatening to fall. "Colonel, the honor has been mine." The transmission completed just as the first rocket-propelled grenade struck the helicopter's tail rotor. The aircraft spun wildly, its pilot fighting to maintain control as the desert rushed up to meet them. But in the split second before impact, Iron Wing saw something that made her heart soar. The data packet had transmitted successfully. The truth was out there, scattered across multiple networks, beyond the reach of the Shadow Network's cleanup protocols. The Mark of Iron had endured. And in that moment, Iron Wing understood that some victories were worth dying for. The crash site was a scene of controlled chaos. The Night Stalker helicopter had gone down hard, its fuselage cracked and twisted, but the crew compartment had remained intact. Iron Wing pulled herself from the wreckage, her left shoulder screaming in protest, but her mind focused on the mission that had consumed her life for 3 years. "Crawford," she called out, "status on the transmission." The young communications specialist was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but his equipment was still functional. "Ma'am, all packets transmitted successfully. The data is out there." Relief flooded through her like a physical sensation. 3 years of running, 3 years of hiding, 3 years of carrying the weight of the truth. And now, finally, the burden was lifted. "Colonel Martinez," she said, helping the Night Stalker pilot to her feet, "are you hurt?" "I'll live, but we're not out of this yet." Martinez checked her sidearm, her eyes scanning the desert around them. "The Shadow Network's hunters are still out there, and they're going to be looking for survivors." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air. Not the mechanical thunder of friendly forces, but the distinctive whine of aircraft designed for one purpose: search and destroy. "Defensive positions," Martinez ordered. "We're going to make them work for it." The survivors of the crash scattered among the rocky outcrops, using the terrain to create overlapping fields of fire. Iron Wing found herself crouched behind a boulder, her service pistol in her hand, watching the searchlights sweep across the desert floor like the eyes of hunting predators. But as she waited for the final assault, her radio crackled with a transmission that made her heart skip. "Iron Wing, this is Ghost Actual. Are you receiving?" She keyed the radio once. "Affirmative." "Outstanding. The data packet has been received and authenticated. As of 20 minutes ago, General Morrison presented the evidence to an emergency session of the House Intelligence Committee. The Shadow Network's operations have been officially suspended pending a full investigation. Iron Wing felt tears streaming down her face. The truth was out. The Shadow Network was finished. The mark of iron had endured. Ghost Actual, this is Iron Wing. Mission accomplished. Negative, Iron Wing. Your mission is just beginning. The words hit her like a physical blow. Sir, the Shadow Network may be finished, but the work of rebuilding trust in the military is just starting. We're going to need people like you, people who understand that some truths are worth fighting for. Iron Wing looked around at the crash site, at the brave soldiers who had risked everything to help her deliver the truth. Crawford, still working with his radio equipment despite his injuries. Martinez, checking her weapon and preparing for a fight she might not survive. Santos and the others, taking defensive positions and waiting for whatever came next. Sir, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that kind of work. Commander, you've spent 3 years carrying the weight of the truth. You've proven that the mark of iron isn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It's about enduring whatever the world throws at you and coming back stronger. That's exactly the kind of person we need. The approaching helicopters were closer now, their searchlights cutting through the darkness like surgical instruments. But something was different about their approach. They weren't moving with the aggressive purpose of hunters. They were moving with the careful precision of rescuers. Iron Wing, this is Dustoff Lead. We're here to bring you home. Iron Wing felt her heart soar. Dustoff was the call sign for medical evacuation helicopters, the angels of the battlefield who risked everything to save wounded soldiers. The Shadow Network's hunters had been replaced by rescuers. Dustoff Lead, this is Iron Wing. We have multiple wounded, need immediate extraction. Copy that, Iron Wing. We're setting down now. The medical evacuation helicopter touched down with the gentle precision of a master surgeon, its crew immediately rushing to assist the wounded. Iron Wing watched as Crawford was loaded onto a stretcher, his radio equipment still clutched in his hands, his face bright with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. "Ma'am," he said as the medics worked on his injuries. "The data packet made it through, all of it. Names, dates, financial records, operation plans, everything." "I know, son. You did good work tonight." "Ma'am, what happens now?" Iron Wing looked up at the desert sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkness. The same stars that had watched over her during 15 years of combat, during 3 years of running, during the longest night of her life. "Now we go home," she said quietly, "and we start rebuilding." Colonel Martinez appeared at her side, her own wounds bandaged but her spirit unbroken. "Commander, General Morrison wants to see you as soon as we get back to base." "Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation." None of us are ever ready for the conversations that matter most, but that's what makes them worth having. As the medical helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the desert battlefield, Iron Wing felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Peace. The truth was out, the Shadow Network was finished, and the mark of iron had endured. But more than that, she'd learned something about herself that she'd forgotten during the long years of running and hiding. She was a soldier, a pilot, a person who believed that some things were worth fighting for. And now, finally, she had the chance to fight for something bigger than herself. The mark of iron wasn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It was about understanding that sometimes the most important battles were fought not in the sky, but in the human heart. And tonight, Iron Wing had won the most important battle of her life. The flight back to base was a study in quiet reflection. The medical helicopter's crew worked efficiently to treat the wounded, their professional competence a reminder of the military's capacity for both destruction and healing. Iron Wing sat in the jump seat, watching the desert pass beneath them, her mind processing the events of the past 24 hours. "Ma'am," Crawford said from his stretcher, his voice weak but determined. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the mark of iron." "What about it, son?" "I think I understand now. It's not just about surviving damage. It's about choosing to keep flying, even when everything around you is falling apart." Iron Wing felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "That's exactly right. The mark of iron isn't something you earn once. It's something you prove every day with every choice you make." "Ma'am, do you think the Shadow Network will try to come back?" "There will always be people who think they can operate outside the law, who think they know better than the people they're supposed to serve. But now Congress knows about them, the media knows about them, and most importantly, soldiers like you know about them. It's going to be much harder for them to operate in the shadows." Colonel Martinez, her own wounds dressed but her eyes alert, leaned forward. "Commander, General Morrison is going to want a full debrief. Everything you know about the Shadow Network, every operation you were involved in, every person you encountered. Are you ready for that?" Iron Wing considered the question. For 3 years she'd been alone with the truth, carrying the weight of knowledge that could destroy careers and end lives. The thought of sharing that burden, of finally being able to speak freely about what she'd experienced, was both terrifying and liberating. "Ma'am, I've been ready for 3 years. I just needed to find the right people to tell." The congressional hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. General Morrison will present the evidence, but she'll need you there to provide context, to explain what the documents mean. "Will I be testifying publicly?" "Some of it will be in closed session, but the American people deserve to know what's been done in their name. The Shadow Network operated with taxpayer funding, used military resources, and put American lives at risk. There will be accountability." Iron Wing looked out at the approaching lights of the air base, the familiar sight of home after 3 years of exile. But home, she realized, wasn't just a place. It was the people who stood with you when everything else fell apart. It was the soldiers who risked their lives to protect the truth, the pilots who flew into danger to bring you home, the communications specialists who made sure the message got through. "Colonel," she said quietly, "what happens to people like Colonel Reeves? He and his team were following orders, trying to do the right thing." "They'll be debriefed, but they won't face charges. They were manipulated by the Shadow Network, used as unwitting pawns in a game they didn't understand. If anything, they'll be commended for their actions once the truth came out." The helicopter touched down with the gentle precision of a master craftsman, its crew immediately coordinating with the medical personnel waiting on the tarmac. Iron Wing watched as Crawford was transferred to a gurney, his radio equipment finally surrendered to the base communications team. "Ma'am," he said as he was wheeled toward the medical facility, "thank you for trusting me with the truth." "Son, thank you for making sure it survived." As the medical team worked, Iron Wing found herself standing alone on the tarmac, looking up at the night sky. The same stars that had watched over her during 15 years of combat, during 3 years of running, during the longest night of her life. But now, for the first time in years, she felt like she could see them clearly. The Mark of Iron wasn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It was about understanding that some truths were worth preserving, some battles were worth fighting, and some people were worth dying for. Tonight, she'd learned that some victories were worth living for too. "Commander Vasquez," a voice called from behind her, "General Morrison is waiting for you." Iron Wing turned to see a young lieutenant, his uniform crisp and his expression respectful. The kind of soldier who represented the best of the military, the ones who believed in duty, honor, and the idea that some things were worth fighting for. "Lead the way, Lieutenant." As they walked toward the base headquarters, Iron Wing felt the weight of 3 years beginning to lift from her shoulders. The truth was out, the Shadow Network was finished, and the Mark of Iron had endured. But more than that, she'd learned something about herself that she'd forgotten during the long years of running and hiding. She was a soldier, a pilot, a person who believed that some things were worth fighting for. And now, finally, she had the chance to fight for something bigger than herself. The Mark of Iron wasn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It was about choosing to keep flying, even when everything around you was falling apart. An iron wing was ready to fly again. General Morrison's office was a study in controlled authority. The walls were lined with commendations, photographs from combat deployments, and the kind of memorabilia that came from 4 decades of military service. But it was the woman behind the desk who commanded attention. Patricia Morrison had the bearing of someone who had made life-and-death decisions in the most challenging circumstances, and her eyes held the wisdom that came from understanding the true cost of leadership. "Commander Vasquez," she said, standing as Iron Wing entered, "please sit down." Iron Wing took the offered chair, her military bearing evident despite her exhaustion. 3 years of running had taken their toll, but her spine was straight, her eyes clear, and her voice steady when she spoke. "General, I want to thank you for what you did tonight. Your people saved my life." "Commander, your people saved the truth. That's worth more than any individual life, including mine." Morrison poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that had clearly been brewing for hours. "I've been tracking the Shadow Network for 3 years, ever since reports of unauthorized operations started filtering up through channels, but I never had proof until tonight." "Ma'am, the Damascus operation was just the beginning. The Shadow Network has been running unauthorized missions for almost a decade. Arms dealing, regime changes, assassinations. Operations that Congress never authorized, that the President never approved." "I know. I've been reviewing the data packet your communications specialist transmitted. Names, dates, financial records, operation plans. It's comprehensive." Iron Wing felt a weight she'd been carrying for 3 years beginning to lift. "Ma'am, I tried to report it through proper channels. When that failed, I went underground." "You did exactly what you should have done. The Shadow Network had infiltrated the reporting structure, had people in positions where they could intercept and suppress information. Going underground was the only way to keep the truth alive." "General, what happens now?" Morrison leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Now we rebuild. The Shadow Network is finished, but the damage they've done to trust in the military is going to take years to repair. We need people like you, people who understand that some truths are worth fighting for." "Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that kind of work. I've been running for 3 years. I'm not sure I remember how to be part of a team." "Commander, you've been part of a team your entire career. Tonight, you proved that the Mark of Iron isn't just about individual survival. It's about understanding that sometimes the mission is bigger than any one person." Iron Wing looked out the window at the base, where the lights of the airfield cut through the darkness like beacons of hope. Somewhere out there, young pilots were preparing for missions, communications specialists were monitoring frequencies, and soldiers were standing watch. The same kinds of people who had risked their lives to help her deliver the truth. "General, what about the congressional hearing?" "Tomorrow morning, 800 hours. You'll be the key witness, the person who can explain what the documents mean, what the Shadow Network was really doing." Morrison's expression grew serious. "It won't be easy. There will be questions, challenges, people who don't want to believe what they're hearing." "Ma'am, I've been carrying this truth for 3 years. I'm ready to share it." "I know you are, but I want you to understand what you're walking into. The Shadow Network had connections throughout the military, the intelligence community, even Congress. Some of the people who will be in that hearing room might have been complicit, might have known what was happening and chosen to look the other way." Iron Wing felt her jaw tighten. "Ma'am, are you saying that some of the people who are supposed to be seeking the truth might actually be trying to bury it?" "I'm saying that the truth is often inconvenient for people who have built their careers on lies. But that's exactly why we need people like you, people who are willing to speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences. The general stood and walked to the window, looking out at the airfield where the next generation of pilots was training. "Commander, I've been in the military for 40 years. I've seen it at its best and at its worst. The Shadow Network represents everything that's wrong with unchecked power, with people who think they're above the law. But you represent everything that's right with the military. Honor, duty, the willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself." "Ma'am, I just did what I thought was right." "That's exactly my point. In a world where too many people are willing to compromise their principles for convenience, you chose to do what was right, even when it cost you everything." Iron Wing felt tears threatening to fall. For 3 years, she'd been alone with the truth, carrying the weight of knowledge that could destroy lives and end careers. The thought of finally being able to share that burden, of having someone understand what she'd been through, was overwhelming. "General, what happens after the hearing?" "That depends on you. The military needs people like you, people who understand that some truths are worth fighting for. But it also needs people who can lead, who can inspire others to do the right thing even when it's difficult." "Are you offering me a position?" "I'm offering you a chance to help rebuild the military's reputation, to show the world that the Shadow Network was an aberration, not the norm. The Mark of Iron isn't just about surviving aircraft damage. It's about understanding that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in the sky, but in the human heart." Iron Wing looked at the general, seeing in her eyes the same dedication that had driven her to carry the truth for 3 years. The same understanding that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. "Ma'am, I'm ready to fight." "I know you are, Commander. I know you are." As the night wore on, Iron Wing found herself thinking about the young soldiers who had helped her deliver the truth. Crawford, still in the medical facility but already asking when he could return to duty. Colonel Reeves and his team, who had chosen to do the right thing even when it meant questioning their orders. The Night Stalker pilots who had risked their lives to bring her home. The Mark of Iron wasn't just about individual survival. It was about understanding that sometimes the mission was bigger than any one person, and sometimes the most important mission of